we do have national security analyst Hal Kempfer. He's standing by as well. And Hal, ultimately, what we talk about during these situations, especially in the early moments of the investigation with something like this, is what can we glean from what police are telling us so far? And so far, what police are telling us is that the man perhaps drove from Colorado Springs. We knew that Kennedy was over there by the house where they were investigating. And my curiosity here, Hal, is when we're talking about a situation like this, what factoids are they searching for in that suspect's home? Are they trying to pull stuff off of computers? Any physical evidence? What are they looking for?
Austin, they're looking for a little bit of everything. Now, obviously, yes, they're trying to pull everything from his computers. They're going to look at his cell phone. They're going to look at any way that he's communicating. They're going to be looking at his financial status, his personal status. I think they're going to find out a lot from his personal status. He apparently was having some marital difficulties. In fact, I have a feeling that when they get into it, that's going to be the primary reason why he did what he did. But they're going to basically build a profile of who he was, trying to figure out his motivation for what he was doing. And of course, one of the things they're going to look at, because they started the investigation looking at it as a potential act of terrorism, is to find out, is he tied to any extremist beliefs, any extremist causes? And it sounds, it doesn't look like that's the case. But with that said, there have been members of the military that have been recruited into violent extremist groups in the past. Need I remind you, Major Nadal Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter, who had violent Islamic extremist beliefs. If you want to go back further, Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma bomber, Oklahoma City bomber, he was Army, a veteran. So they're going to be looking to see if that's possible, if he was brought in. However, there are some things that are rather inconsistent with that as they go on. You know, the bomb was rather limited considering his background and capabilities. He was a master sergeant in special forces. Certainly, he knows a lot about explosive ordnance and how to build a bomb. And that was not a well-constructed bomb. But it's not clear if that was meant to be a destructive bomb or if the destruction of the bomb was simply aimed at destroying whatever was inside the vehicle himself, which was basically himself. And then, of course, the other thing is that it's become clear that he took his own life with apparently that Desert Eagle 50 caliber pistol prior to the explosion taking place. So they're going to try and piece all this together, try to build a psychological profile, figure out what his goals, what his motivations were, to find out, was he tied to any other extremist, or was he tied to an extremist group? Is there an ongoing threat? Is there something that they should be looking at, or was this a lone wolf style event? In this case, the lone wolf was a suicide that was rather a very big suicide, very high profile suicide, obviously. But if you look at his operational tempo, being in special forces, being deployed all the time, it's a sad but true reflection that certainly for the last 20, 25 years, that the operational tempo of the armed forces is so great, particularly in the special operations community, that it does incur a psychological and emotional cost on our troops, and the suicide rates are just extraordinarily high, and I would say very unacceptable, and that may be, at the root of the problem.
One of my big questions here is, and we don't know how much experience this person had with whatever type of munition perhaps was in that Cybertruck. You talked about Oklahoma City, Hal, and we were kind of discussing that in the newsroom earlier today. The comparison of a truck being outside of a large building, and then explosives going off. Is it possible that this person, however this played out, perhaps thought that this explosion would be bigger than it actually turned out to be?
I think he probably thought it was, based on, they went in there and looked at it. He bought stuff that was, basically available at retail level. He bought fireworks mortars, if you will. He may have bought a very low grade explosive that's called tannerite, that's used on shooting ranges for long range shooting. You put the tannerite behind the target, and if you hit it, it makes a little explosion. So if you're doing stuff like long range sniper or long range shooting, you can actually see when you hit the target very clearly because there's a little explosion that takes place. And that's actually been involved. There was a case in Los Angeles where somebody he didn't actually end up getting charged with terrorism, but we're pretty sure he was planning a terrorist attack. Was using had lots of tannerite on him, and that was what they thought he was probably going to do. And then, of course, he also had basically an accelerant gas, if you will, that was used in the vehicle as well. Now, obviously, what he had, he would have to know that that would not cause an explosion, certainly anything even remotely similar to what you saw in Oklahoma City. But he may have thought he was going to get a bigger explosion out of it. And because when they went in there, they found out that a lot of this, he put a lot of the basically the fireworks, if you will, closely together, but it didn't cause a big sympathetic detonation. Some of it blew up, and some of it just kind of sat there inert. And so he didn't get the explosive factor he was aiming at. And I would bring out something else. Being a master sergeant in special forces, and I don't claim to know all these things, but as you know, I kind of have a background with a kind of a couple of special operations units, and yes, we went out and blew up a lot of stuff. Okay, and so you get kind of familiar with how that works. He would have enough knowledge to understand how those explosives would work and what their limitations were. He'd also probably have a pretty good idea of the vehicle he'd want, and it's very possible that whereas people are saying he picked the wrong vehicle for causing an explosion, he may have picked that vehicle because it did have the reinforced sides that would not cause a lateral explosive effect that would cause a lot of collateral damage. So that may have been something I was thinking. That's something I'm sure that FBI investigators are going to look at, which is, did he intentionally pick that vehicle? In part maybe to make a statement because it's Tesla and aligned with Elon Musk, and the explosion took place at the Trump International Hotel. But could it also have been because he was looking at the vehicle dynamics themselves and trying to contain the blast in a way that most of the blast causes the damage within the vehicle, destroying, as you heard the sheriff talk about, completely just incinerate his remains. And that may have been part of his calculus. And I know it sounds strange, but for certain parts of the military, we think through issues like that. You think through
Yeah.
what the battle damage assessment will be and what it'll look like. And, and he may have in his whatever convoluted stuff that was going through his brain at the time, that may have been something he was thinking about. So I
Yeah.
can't rule that out at this point.
Got to ask you about New Orleans as well. So we got these images in the past hour. The FBI releasing these new images of the suspect who was near Bourbon Street more than an hour before the attack. This was him pacing around the exact area that he would later plow through the crowd. The FBI is asking witnesses who passed him on the street or saw this blue ice chest containing the IED to contact them, by the way. If anybody did see anybody dressed like this, they're looking for more photos. They're looking for more information. They are still doing a lot of fact-finding behind the scenes here. I'm going to read one of the paragraphs here, Hal. They say this is surveillance footage from 2:03 a.m. Central Time, about an hour before the crash. This is the suspect as he walked along a street near Governor Nichols Street. The footage shows the suspect dressed in a light brown long coat, a dark-colored button-down shirt, blue jeans, and what appears to be brown dress shoes. The FBI also, as you see there, releasing a photo of one of the coolers containing an IED, which was placed by the suspect near the intersection. I got this question a lot on social media earlier today when we posted this. Can you just explain in layman's terms, what does IED mean, Hal, and why are these photos important with this investigation?
Well, IED stands for improvised explosive device. He had basically built a couple of bombs that, and information coming out today has indicated that they had a remote detonator in the truck with him to set off a couple of bombs. That's the improvised explosive devices. As you see, the container that he used was a cooler, right there. And that's how those four individuals they were looking at earlier. Apparently, there were four individuals, three men and one woman, who had expressed curiosity about these containers on Bourbon Street and may have opened up, looked at them, or done something. And so the FBI initially was looking for them as possible accomplices because they thought maybe they were the ones that set these things out. Of course, it turns out that's not the case. It was something he had set out. One of the things I would point out too is look at how he's dressed. It's very low key. It's the sort of thing that if you were to walk onto, if you were doing intentional surveillance of Bourbon Street, that would be a perfect attire. You wouldn't really draw any attention to yourself. It's very understated. It would certainly fit the sort of bar nightclub sort of atmosphere that is Bourbon Street, particularly around New Year's. So he was able to do something, and I think we may have talked on the air about this yesterday when this story first came out about the possibility he was doing pre-attack surveillance, because you look at the method that he went in there, the timing of when he went in, going around the police car on the sidewalk down Bourbon Street. To me, that indicates that he did some rather detailed pre-attack surveillance, and this kind of confirms what was most likely there, which is he actually parked somewhere, got out of his vehicle, walked the street, looked at what was there. You'd be, in his mind, he's looking for, okay, what's blocking the street, or where are there ways I can get around whatever's blocking the street, which is exactly what he did. And then he'd be looking on the street to find out, are there any obstacles that he would run into on the street? Is there something set up? Is there, something that could slow him down? And once he had done that, he basically finalized his plans, and then he drove around went around the police car that was blocking or insufficiently blocking Bourbon Street, and then just basically accelerated and caused all that carnage along Bourbon Street.
I got to ask you too, Hal, because you're touching on something that I am very curious about. What's the standard line of defense against attacks like this? Obviously, police can line up vehicles to act as barricades. In fact, one of the security camera footage that we saw showed the suspect driving right around a police car in order to do what he did. But I've seen a lot of chatter about bollards as well, Hal.
Yes, well, the bollards are these heavy-duty, if you will, round stanchions that fit well into the street. If a vehicle hits them, they'll stop them cold. Now, the older style stuff is what they actually have on the street right now, which is it's difficult to explain, but it's kind of like a mini ramp that raises up, and it raises up in the direction of the oncoming traffic. So as a vehicle would hit it with its tires, they would basically be caught, and it would slow the vehicle down, if not stop it completely, because it couldn't keep moving forward. And then there's a couple of obstacles that are heavy steel obstacles. Same concept. The vehicle hits it, and they basically act like a block that stops or slows the vehicle down. In both those cases, the vehicle would not be able to do an accelerated movement down the street. At most, they would be moving very, very slowly down the street if they could move at all. That's what they have out there now. One of the reasons they have these bollards, which apparently were in for maintenance, and that's one that everybody's questioning. By the way, the governor of Louisiana has this afternoon started making some very pointed comments about New Orleans and their lack of preparedness on this. But they had taken those bollards out. They did not replace them with the things I just talked about, and they used that police cruiser. Now, what you see is, in fact, if you look at this picture, you'll see this heavy-duty truck, high clearance that they often use in flooding events and stuff. That's what they're using now. That's a vehicle that covers a lot more space, very difficult to move around. And then you see that thing with the little ramp thing that comes up. That's on there now. The reason they weren't using the ramp initially, it's a very common thing to use, but the reason they weren't using it was because they had a maintenance problem and a functionality problem. One of the things that probably wasn't built into the planning was one thing that would defeat it, which was the beads, those beads that they hand out on Bourbon Street. And so people were going by and throwing the beads into the mechanism of the automatic block, if you will, the ramp thing that
Gets
comes up
stuck in
and
the
blocks it,
machinery.
it shuts down the machinery. And that's why they said, okay, we can't use this on Bourbon Street anymore because everybody keeps coming by, and there may have been alcohol involved when they were throwing the beads into the machinery itself. And so it was jamming it up all the time. And they finally said, we've got to come up with a better idea. So they came up with the bollards. They used the bollards. But of course, this just sounds like perfect bureaucracy as they you take down the bollards, and they didn't have the other thing in place, and it was an opening. And obviously he went down, he walked the street, he saw what could be done, he came up with a plan, and he did it. And I would mention he has a military background. He wasn't special forces or anything, but he has enough military background where he can put together a plan sufficient to figure out what's done. And by the way, that idea of a vehicle-borne attack, you don't have to think too much because ISIS puts out stuff online
Yeah.
explaining to people this is how you do a vehicle ramming attack. So it was all in there. By the
We
way,
got to go
I
in
should
2
also
minutes,
mention one.
Hal. I got to ask
Yeah.
you really quick, but just before we go in 2 minutes here, because the ISIS connection, um, there's a difference between being a member of ISIS and being inspired by ISIS. Can you explain?
Well, what is a member of ISIS? It's often somebody, sometimes you hear it explained, they go, well, are they a card carrying, current dues paying member of ISIS? It's a terrorist organization. If you, there's a big difference between what we see in the past, where there are people who are actually went to ISIS training camps, and then they infiltrated back into, say, Europe or something, and did a big attack in Paris and stuff like that. He's somebody who falls into another category, and we've seen this with Al Qaeda. We've seen this with other groups as well. They go online. They're going down a radical path. They get recruited online. Somewhere, someone's guiding them, and what they end up doing is they end up basically becoming, self-recruited, if you will, in some ways, that they affiliate with ISIS without ever having formally become part of ISIS. And they are inspired. In fact, ISIS tells them, go out and do your own sort of entrepreneurial attacks. And they give them all sorts of stuff. And that's where it's looking more and more that he fell in that category. We don't see any international travel that would be associated with the previous example of being formally trained or something. What we're seeing is that somehow he got recruited. What the FBI wants to know, was this just a virtual thing, or was there actually somebody like a physical recruiter, maybe that was hanging out at a mosque or something like that, that may have, spotted him? And by the way, I should mention, military are prime recruits for extremist groups. They're always looking for somebody with military experience. And it's not that the military is any larger percentage of extremists. It's just that they have training, skills, capabilities that if they are brought into an extremist movement, they can potentially be much more dangerous than your
Yeah.
average civilian.
Hal Kempfer, as always, we've relied on you so much, and you've done double duty today for us. We appreciate you, Hal. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks, Austin.